last at least 3 hours. We'll be here the whole time and take you through it. We'll also be talking to senators from both sides of the aisle during any breaks and when things wrap up. First up, though, Chad Pergram watching it all on Capitol Hill. Chad, what can we expect?
Well, we're looking at the Senate floor there. They usually come in a couple of minutes after the top of the hour. They've never actually, started right at the beginning. But we'll see the Chief Justice come in and gavel the Senate into session. There'll be about 5 or 6 minutes probably of business there. Barry Black, the Senate chaplain, he always delivers the opening prayer, and it's usually pretty poignant. He usually directs his remarks and prayer directly at the senators, depending on the issue at hand. And it's usually, as I say, quite poignant. So that's something to listen to as well. And then we move to another phase. This is the first Saturday session in this Senate trial with President Trump. There were 3 Saturday sessions in 1999 in the trial of President Clinton, and Pat Cipollone, the White House counsel, and his team will probably talk for about 3 hours. Jay Sekulow, one of the other president's attorneys, he called this kind of a movie trailer. They're not going to take the full 8 hours today. And one of the reasons is because a lot of the senators are anxious to get out of here. When I've been talking with them, Neil, this is about as anxious as I've seen any group of lawmakers wanting to get out of the building. I mean, we've had some lengthy sessions here. Everybody just wanting to get home, and they wanted to give senators a day. The Senate impeachment rules require that you meet on Saturday, and that's why they're here today. Senate Impeachment Rule 3 says that. But then Monday and Tuesday, that's when we'll have those longer sessions, probably where they take about 8 hours, like you were seeing with the House impeachment managers. Now, something that happened just a couple of moments ago, the House impeachment managers walked over what they called their trial record. They loaded this up on carts and walked it from the House side of the Capitol to the Senate. All 7 of the House Democratic impeachment managers were there. 28,500 pages in this trial record. And they note that, of course, it's incomplete because there were documents and other testimony that they wanted from the White House and the administration, and they never got that. So what are we expecting to see? Expect to hear a lot, maybe not necessarily today, but in the coming days, about the Bidens. Jay Sekulow indicated that he thought that the Democrats overplayed their hand, talking so extensively on Thursday about the Bidens. And when I spoke with independent Maine Senator Angus King yesterday, he thought that that was kind of a pre-buttal with the anticipation that they would, be talking about the Bidens a lot and the need to have the Bidens testify. So that's why they wanted to kind of do that pre-buttal. Barry Black,
Chad, I don't mean to jump on you, my friend. I just want to go. This is already starting with the opening prayers. You said the Republicans now get their chance to take on this case.
You are our hope for the years to come. We trust the power of your prevailing providence to bring this impeachment trial to the conclusion you desire. Lord, we acknowledge that your thoughts are not our thoughts, and your ways are not our ways. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are your thoughts higher than our thoughts, and your ways higher than our ways. Lord, we love you. Empower our senators, renew their strength. We pray in your dependable name. Amen.
Amen. Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance to our flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Senators, please be seated. If there is no objection, the Journal of Proceedings of the trial are approved to date. The Sergeant-at-Arms will make the proclamation.
Hear ye, hear ye, hear ye. All persons are commanded to keep silent on pain of imprisonment while the Senate of the United States is sitting for the trial of the articles of impeachment exhibited by the House of Representatives against Donald John Trump, President of the United States.
The Majority Leader is recognized.
Colleagues, we should expect 2 to 3 hours of session today. We'll take a quick break if needed.
Pursuant to the provisions of Senate Resolution 483, the Counsel for the President have 24 hours to make the presentation of their case. The Senate will now hear you. The presiding officer recognizes Mr. Cipollone to begin presentation of the case for the President.
Thank you, Mr. Chief Justice. Senators, Leader McConnell, Democratic Leader Schumer, thank you for your time and thank you for your attention. I want to start out just very briefly giving you a short plan for today. We're going to be very respectful of your time. As Leader McConnell said, we anticipate going about 2 to 3 hours at most and to be out of here by 1 o'clock at the latest. We're going to focus today on 2 points. You heard the House managers speak for nearly 24 hours over 3 days. We don't anticipate using that much time. We don't believe that they have come anywhere close to meeting their burden for what they're asking you to do. In fact, we believe that when you hear the facts, and that's what we intend to cover today, the facts, you will find that the President did absolutely nothing wrong. And what we intend to do today, and we'll have more presentations in greater detail on Monday, but what we intend to do today is go through their record that they established in the House. And we intend to show you some of the evidence that they adduced in the House that they decided over their 3 days and 24 hours that they didn't have enough time or made a decision not to show you. And every time you see one of these pieces of evidence, ask yourself, why didn't I see that in the first 3 days? They had it. It came out of their process. Why didn't they show that to the Senate? And I think that's an important question, because as House managers, really their goal should be to give you all of the facts, because they're asking you to do something very, very consequential, and I would submit to you, to use a word that Mr. Schiff used a lot, very, very dangerous. And that's the second point that I'd ask you to keep in mind today. They're asking you not only to overturn the results of the last election, but as I've said before, they're asking you to remove President Trump from the ballot in an election that's occurring in approximately 9 months. They're asking you to tear up all of the ballots across this country on your own initiative. Take that decision away from the American people. And I don't think they spent 1 minute of their 24 hours talking to you about the consequences of that for our country. Not 1 minute. They didn't tell you what that would mean for our country today, this year, and forever into our future. They're asking you to do something that no Senate has ever done. And they're asking you to do it with no evidence. And that's wrong, and I ask you to keep that in mind. I ask you to keep that in mind. So what I would do is point out one piece of evidence for you, and then I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues, and they will walk you through their record, and they will show you things that they didn't show you. Now, they didn't talk a lot about the transcript of the call, which I would submit is the best evidence of what happened on the call. And they said things over and over again that are simply not true. One of them was there's no evidence of President Trump's interest in burden sharing. That wasn't the real reason. But they didn't tell you that burden sharing was discussed in the call, in the transcript of the call. They didn't tell you that. Why? Let me read it to you. Here's the president, and we'll go through the entire transcript. I'm not going to read the whole transcript. We'll make it available. I'm sure you have it, but we'll make available copies of the transcript so you can have it. The president said, and they read this line, "I will say that we do a lot for Ukraine. We spend a lot of effort and a lot of time." But they stopped there. They didn't read the following. "Much more than European countries are doing. And they should be helping you more than they are. Germany does almost nothing for you. All they do is talk. And I think it's something that you should really ask them about. When I was speaking to Angela Merkel, she talks Ukraine, but she doesn't do anything. A lot of European countries are the same way. So I think it's something you want to look at, but the United States has been very, very good to Ukraine." That's where they picked up again with the quote. But they left out the entire discussion of burden sharing. Now, what does President Zelensky say? Does he disagree? No, he agrees. They didn't tell you this. They didn't tell you this. Didn't have time in 24 hours to tell you this. Yes, you are absolutely right. Not only 100%, but actually 100%. And I can tell you the following. I did talk to Angela Merkel, and I did meet with her. And I also met and talked with Macron. And I told them that they are not doing quite as much as they need to be doing on the issues with the sanctions. They are not enforcing the sanctions. They are not working as much as they should work for Ukraine. It turns out that even though logically the European Union should be our biggest partner, but technically the United States is a much bigger partner than the European Union. And I'm very grateful to you for that, because the United States is doing quite a lot for Ukraine. Much more than the European Union, especially when we are talking about sanctions against the Russian Federation. Okay. You heard a lot about the importance of confronting Russia, and we're going to talk about that. And you will hear that President Trump has a strong record on confronting Russia. You will hear that President Trump has a strong record of support for Ukraine. You will hear that from the witnesses in their record that they didn't tell you about. So that's one very important example. They come here to the Senate and they ask you, remove a president, tear up the ballots in all of your states. And they don't bother to read the key evidence of the discussion of burden sharing that's in the call itself. Now, that's emblematic of their entire presentation. I'm going to turn the presentation over to my colleague, Mike Propera. He's going to walk you through many more examples of this. And with each example, ask yourself, why am I just hearing about this now, after 24 hours of sitting through arguments? Why? And the reason is, we can talk about the process, we will talk about the law, but today we are going to confront them on the merits of their argument. Now, they have the burden of proof. And they have not come close to meeting it. In fact, and I want to ask you to think about one issue regarding process, beyond process. If you were really interested in finding out the truth, why would you run a process the way they ran? If you were really confident in your position on the facts, why would you lock everybody out of it from the president's side? Why would you do that? We will talk about the process arguments, but the process arguments also are compelling evidence on the merits, because it's evidence that they themselves don't believe in the facts of their case. And the fact that they came here for 24 hours and hid evidence from you is further evidence that they don't really believe in the facts of their case. That this is, for all their talk about election interference, that they're here to perpetrate the most massive interference in an election in American history, and we can't allow that to happen. It would violate our Constitution. It would violate our history. It would violate our obligations to the future. And most importantly, it would violate the sacred trust that the American people have placed in you and have placed in them. The American people decide elections. They have one coming up in 9 months. So we will be very efficient. We will begin our presentation today. We will show you a lot of evidence that they should have showed you, and we will finish efficiently and quickly so that we can all go have an election. Thank you, and I yield to my colleague, Michael Propera.
Mr. Chief Justice, members of the Senate, good morning. Again, my name is Michael Propera. I serve as Deputy Counsel to the President. It is my honor and privilege to appear before you today on behalf of President Donald J. Trump.
And what is the President's response? Well, it reads like a classic organized crime shakedown. Shorn of its rambling character and in not so many words, this is the essence of what the President communicates. We've been very good to your country, very good. No other country has done as much as we have. But you know what? I don't see much reciprocity here. I hear what you want. I have a favor I want from you, though. And I'm going to say this only 7 times, so you better listen good. I want you to make up dirt on my political opponent, understand lots of it. On this and on that, I'm going to put you in touch with people, and not just any people. I'm going to put you in touch with Attorney General of the United States, my Attorney General, Bill Barr. He's got the whole weight of the American law enforcement behind him. And I'm going to put you in touch with Rudy. You're going to love him, trust me. You know what I'm asking, and so I'm only going to say this a few more times, in a few more ways. And by the way, don't call me again. I'll call you when you've done what I asked. This is, in sum and character, what the President was trying to communicate.
That's fake. That's not the real call. That's not the evidence here. That's not the transcript that Mr. Cipollone just referenced. And we can shrug it off and say we were making light or a joke, but that was in a hearing in the United States House of Representatives discussing the removal of the President of the United States from office. There are very few things, if any, that can be as grave and as serious. Let's stick with the evidence. Let's talk about the facts and the evidence in this case. The most important piece of evidence we have in the case, and before you, is the one that we began with nearly 4 months ago. the actual transcript of the July 25, 2019 telephone call between President Trump and President Zelensky. The real transcript. If that were the only evidence we had, it would be enough to show that the Democrats' entire theory is completely unfounded. But the transcript is far from the only evidence demonstrating that the president did nothing wrong. Once you sweep away all of the bluster and innuendo, the selective leaks, the closed-door examinations of the Democrats' hand-picked witnesses, the staged public hearings, what we're left with are 6 key facts that have not and will not change. First, the transcript shows that the president did not condition either security assistance or a meeting on anything. The paused security assistance funds aren't even mentioned on the call. Second, President Zelensky and other Ukrainian officials have repeatedly said that there was no quid pro quo and no pressure on them to review anything. Third, President Zelensky and high-ranking Ukrainian officials did not even know the security assistance was paused until the end of August, over a month after the July 25 call. Fourth, not a single witness testified that the president himself said that there was any connection between any investigations and security assistance, a presidential meeting, or anything else. Fifth, the security assistance flowed on September 11, and a presidential meeting took place on September 25, without the Ukrainian government announcing any investigations. Finally, the Democrats' blind drive to impeach the president does not and cannot change the fact, as attested to by the Democrats' own witnesses, that President Trump has been a better friend and stronger supporter of Ukraine than his predecessor. Those are the facts. We plan to address some of them today and some of them next week. Each one of these 6 facts, standing alone, is enough to sink the Democrats' case. Combined, they establish what we've known since the beginning. The president did absolutely nothing wrong. The Democrats' allegation that the president engaged in a quid pro quo is unfounded and contrary to the facts. The truth is simple, and it's right before our eyes. The president was at all times acting in our national interest and pursuant to his oath of office. But before I dive in and speak further about the facts, let me mention something that my colleagues will discuss in greater detail. The facts that I'm about to discuss today are the Democrats' facts. This is important because the House managers spoke to you for a very long time, over 21 hours, and have repeatedly claimed to you that their case is, and their evidence is overwhelming and uncontested. It's not. I'm going to share a number of facts with you this morning that the House managers didn't share with you during more than 21 hours. I'll ask you, as Mr. Cipollone already mentioned, that when you hear me say something that the House managers didn't present to you, ask yourself, why didn't they tell me that? Is that something I would have liked to have known? Why am I hearing it for the first time from the president's lawyers? It's not because they didn't have enough time, that's for sure. They only showed you a very selective part of the record, their record. And they, remember this, they have the very heavy burden of proof before you. The president is forced to mount a defense in this chamber against a record that the Democrats developed. The record that we have to go on today is based entirely on House Democratic facts pre-cleared in a basement bunker. Not mostly, entirely. Yet even those facts absolutely exonerate the president. Let's start with the transcript. The president did not link security assistance to any investigations on the July 25 call. Let's step back. On July 25, President Trump called President Zelensky. This was their second phone call. Both were congratulatory. On April 21st, President Trump called to congratulate President Zelensky on winning the presidential election. On July 25, the president called because President Zelensky's party had just won a large number of seats in Parliament. On September 24, before Speaker Pelosi had any idea what President Trump and President Zelensky actually said on the July 25 call, she called for an impeachment inquiry into President Trump. In the interest of full transparency and to show that he had done nothing wrong, President Trump took the unprecedented step of declassifying the call transcript so that the American people could see for themselves exactly what the two presidents discussed. So, what did President Trump say to President Zelensky on the July 25 call? President Trump raised two issues. I'm going to be speaking about those two issues a fair amount this morning. They're the two issues that go to the core of how President Trump approaches foreign aid. When it comes to sending U.S. taxpayer money overseas, the president is focused on burden sharing and corruption. First, the president, rightly, had real concerns about whether European and other countries were contributing their fair share to ensuring Ukraine's security. Second, corruption. Since the fall of the Soviet Union, Ukraine has suffered from one of the worst environments for corruption in the world. A parade of witnesses testified in the House about the pervasive corruption in Ukraine and how it is in America's foreign policy and national security interests to help Ukraine combat corruption. Turning to the call, right off the bat, President Trump mentioned burden sharing to President Zelensky. President Trump told President Zelensky that Germany does almost nothing for you, and a lot of European countries are the same way. President Trump specifically mentioned speaking to Angela Merkel of Germany, whom he said talks Ukraine, but she doesn't do anything. President Zelensky agreed. You are absolutely right. He said that he spoke with the leaders of Germany and France and told them that they are not doing quite as much as they need to be doing. So right at the beginning of the call, President Trump was talking about burden sharing. President Trump then turned to corruption in the form of foreign interference in the 2016 presidential election. There is absolutely nothing wrong with asking a foreign leader to help get to the bottom of all forms of foreign interference in an American presidential election. You'll hear more about that later from one of my colleagues. What else did the president say? The president also warned President Zelensky that he appeared to be surrounding himself with some of the same people as his predecessor and suggested that a very fair and very good prosecutor was shut down by some very bad people. Again, one of my colleagues will speak more about that. The content of the July 25 call was in line with the Trump administration's legitimate concerns about corruption and reflected the hope that President Zelensky, who campaigned on a platform of reform, would finally clean up Ukraine. So what did President Trump and President Zelensky discuss on the July 25 call? Two issues: burden sharing, corruption. Just as importantly, what wasn't discussed on the July 25 call? There was no discussion of the paused security assistance on the July 25 call. House Democrats keep pointing to President Zelensky's statement that, "I would also like to thank you for your great support in the area of defense." But he wasn't talking there about the paused security assistance. He tells us in the very next sentence exactly what he was talking about: Javelin missiles. We are ready, President Zelensky continues, to continue to cooperate for the next step. Specifically, we are almost ready to buy more Javelins from the United States for defense purposes. Javelins are the anti-tank missiles only made available to the Ukrainians by President Trump. President Obama refused to give Javelins to the Ukrainians for years. Javelin sales were not part of the security assistance that had been paused at the time of the call. Javelin sales have nothing to do with the paused security assistance. Those are different programs entirely. But don't take my word for it. Both former Ambassador to Ukraine Marie Yovanovitch and NSC Senior Director Timothy Morrison confirmed that the Javelin missiles and the security assistance were unrelated. The House managers didn't tell you about Ambassador Yovanovitch's and Tim Morrison's testimony. Why not? They couldn't have taken 2 to 5 minutes out of 21 hours to make sure you understood that the Javelin sales being discussed were not part of the paused security assistance. This puts the following statement by President Trump in a whole new light, doesn't it? I would like you to do us a favor, though, because our country has been through a lot and Ukraine knows a lot about it. As everyone knows by now, President Trump asked President Zelensky to do us a favor. And he made clear that us referred to our country and not himself. More importantly, the president was not connecting do us a favor to the Javelin sales that President Zelensky mentioned. It makes no sense in the language there. But even if he had been, the Javelin sales were not part of the security assistance that had been temporarily paused. I want to be very clear about this. When the House Democrats claim that the Javelin sales discussed on the July 25 call are part of the paused security assistance, it is misleading. They are trying to confuse you and just sort of wrap everything in instead of unpacking it the right way. There was no mention of the paused security assistance on the call, and certainly not from President Trump. As you know, head of state calls are staffed by a number of aides on both sides. Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman, a detailee at the National Security Council, raised a concern about the call. And that was just a policy concern. Lieutenant Colonel Vindman admitted that he did not know whether there was a crime or anything of that nature, but he had deep policy concerns. Policy concerns. So there you have it. But the president sets the foreign policy. In a democracy such as ours, the elected leaders make foreign policy while the unelected staff, such as Lieutenant Colonel Vindman, implement the policy. Other witnesses were on the July 25 call and had very different reactions than that of Lieutenant Colonel Vindman. Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg, National Security Advisor to the Vice President, former acting National Security Advisor, and a long-serving and highly decorated veteran, attended the call. According to General Kellogg, I was on the much-reported July 25 call between President Donald Trump and President Zelensky. As an exceedingly proud member of the Trump administration, of President Trump's administration, and as a 34-year, highly experienced combat veteran who retired with the rank of Lieutenant General in the Army, I heard nothing wrong or improper on the call. I had and have no concerns. The House managers said that other witnesses were also troubled by the July 25 call and identified those witnesses as Jennifer Williams and Tim Morrison. Jennifer Williams, who works for Lieutenant General Kellogg, now claims that she has concerns about the call. You heard that from the House managers. They were very careful in the way they worded that. What they didn't tell you is that Ms. Williams was so troubled at the time of the call that she told exactly 0 people of her concern. She told no one for 2 months following the call. Not one person. Ms. Williams didn't raise any concerns about the call when it took place, not with Lieutenant General Kellogg, not with counsel, not with anyone. Ms. Williams waited to announce her concerns until Speaker Pelosi publicly announced her impeachment inquiry. The House managers didn't tell you that. Why not? Tim Morrison, who is Lieutenant Colonel Vindman's boss, was also on the call. Mr. Morrison reported the call to the National Security Council lawyers not because he was troubled by anything on the call, but because he was worried about leaks, and in his words, how it would play out in Washington's polarized environment. I want to be clear, Mr. Morrison testified, I was not concerned that anything illegal was discussed. Mr. Morrison further testified that there was nothing improper and nothing illegal about anything that was said on the call. In fact, Mr. Morrison repeatedly testified that he disagreed with Lieutenant Colonel Vindman's assessment that President Trump made demands of President Zelensky, or that he said anything improper at all. Here's Mr. Morrison.
In that transcript, does the President not ask Zelensky to look into the Bidens?
Mr. Chairman, I can only tell you what I was thinking at the time. That is not what I understood the President to be doing.
Do you believe, in your opinion, that the President of the United States demanded that President Zelensky undertake these investigations?
No, sir.
And you didn't hear the President make a demand, did you?
No, sir.
Again, there were no demands from your perspective, Mr. Morrison.
That is correct, sir.
But is it fair to say that as you were listening to the call, you weren't thinking, wow, the President is bribing the President of Ukraine? That never crossed your mind?
It did not, sir.
Or that he was extorting the President of the Ukraine?
It did not, sir.
Or doing anything improper?
Correct, sir.
Significantly, the Ukrainian government never raised any concerns about the July 25 call. Just hours after the call, Ambassador William Taylor, head of the U.S. mission in Ukraine, had dinner with the then Secretary of the Ukrainian National Security and Defense Council, who seemed to think that the call went fine. The call went well. He wasn't disturbed by anything. The House managers didn't tell you that. Why not? Ambassador Kurt Volker, the U.S. Special Representative for Ukraine, was not on the call. But Ambassador Volker spoke regularly with President Zelensky and other top officials in the Ukraine government, and even met with President Zelensky the day after the call. He testified that in no way, shape, or form in either the readouts from the United States or Ukraine did he receive any indication whatsoever for anything that resembles a quid pro quo on the July 25 call.